And when you get to these locations, are you simply sending stories back of what you're seeing, or are you told, hey, this is the topic I would really like you to cover? How are you deciding?
The LA Times really puts a lot of faith in their correspondents. They know that you're there. You're in touch with what's happening. You're on the ground and you're seeing, so they very rarely will try to dictate what kind of stories. And you're 15 hours ahead of them. So you're getting the story before they even wake up. Now we do, I rarely talk to them because it's so difficult getting a phone call through. We talk mostly through email, and I will tell them what here's where I'm going the next day and here's what I'm looking for, and they'll say, great. From time to time they'll say, okay, one issue that's come up here is, and people are asking questions about this, so while you're out, see if you can find something about this particular issue. But day to day, it's on the reporter to find the stories and to determine what you're going to cover and what you're going to see. And every day you don't know what you're going to see. In Libya, it was just go to the front every day, find out what's happening, talk to people, describe the situation.
Are you writing about a story a day?
Oh yeah, usually. And
Okay.
sometimes breaking news, but what I'm really looking for is more the enterprise story and the larger stories, and that's what the paper wants. You have to do dailies if something major happens, and there's always a decision of is this story worth investing the time in, or if it's just a routine event, you can let the wire services just run a short wire piece and basically focus on getting the larger stories. And the stories really become evident. The enterprise stories, as you're out there, there's so many of them you can't do them all, so you just have to kind of pick the best ones. I mean, there's all kind of issues arise, and what I like is the people are right there. Once you get on the ground, everything's right there, and you can really get some very, very interesting stories that way.
Do you have a favorite enterprise piece that you've done?
God, I like them all. I'm trying to think. One on my last trip to Libya was interesting. It was had to do with landmines, which the Gaddafi side, this was before the Gaddafi government fell, was getting desperate, and they started laying landmines in all these civilian areas and all kind of areas. And the rebels sort of came up with this ad hoc team of people with no experience and no training who just went out and found mines and learned how to disarm them. There were a few guys who had defected from the military, who knew a little bit about munitions, but basically they were just guys, just people, ordinary people who would go out with no protection, like with none of the big armor suits, with like flip-flops and a stick, and would go out and probe for mines and carefully dig them up and disarm them based on limited, an hour's training or so. And I thought, that's fascinating. So I went out with those guys and watched them do it and talked about it and just described the process.
Is it normally just you when you're doing these kind of reports? Do you have a photographer? An interpreter?
On two of the trips that I made to Libya, I had a photographer. The other time I was by myself, but I always have the interpreter. So it's usually two of us or three of us
Who do you
going
prefer?
out. Oh, I like having a photographer there. I really do. The stories get better play. The photographers at the LA Times are fantastically talented. And they're also journalists, so I can bounce off story ideas with them, and they'll see things that I didn't see, and they'll propose, hey, let's go do this. So it's like you're double the manpower and double the story ideas. You got two sets of eyes. It's really, really helpful. And plus, they get just powerful photographs that really help bring the story to life. When they're not there, I take my own photos, but they're not nearly as good, and I don't have the time to really focus on getting great pictures. I'll, take what I can. But I much prefer a photographer.
I'd like to ask you a couple questions about Thunder Road.
Mm-hmm.
You wrote the piece after what you called one of the most underreported battles in Iraq. Why do you think this is the case?
That was a case where it was incredibly confusing. Nobody knew what was going on, and this was the rush into Baghdad by a unit called the 3rd Infantry Division. And I was one of the only 2 or 3 journalists that was embedded with that particular unit, because there were so many different units, and they turned out to be the ones that went into Baghdad and took Baghdad, but there was no coverage of it. And it happened so fast, and events got overtaken after the fall of Baghdad. The focus turned to weapons of mass destruction. Were there any, and where are they? So it sort of got forgotten because it happened so quick and there was nobody covering it. And there were things I didn't know about it, and I was there because the the division was spread into 3 different battalions who were in different places. I was with one of them, so I saw my own little corner of what happened, but I didn't realize until I started talking to people all the things that had happened elsewhere, which were amazing, which had never been reported. So it gradually dawned on me, wow, this is, I wrote a magazine story for the newspaper, and I realized there's much more to this. So I decided there's a book here just telling the story of basically 3 or 4 days. Where the battle was most intense and the government fell. I mean, it was basically the climax of the entire invasion.
How did you witness the battle?
I was in a Bradley, which is a Bradley fighting vehicle, which is like a big metal box with guns on it. And I was inside with 5 or 6 Marines and soldiers. It was a mixed unit. They were the guys who called in the airstrikes. So they had Marines there and Army with different specialties. But it was also an offensive weapon. They had gunners and regular soldiers, and we went straight into Baghdad on what they call the Thunder Runs, which was basically getting in a line of armored vehicles and fighting your way into the center of the city. So I was on one of those and ended up right downtown at the palace, at the Republican Palace, which was Saddam Hussein's main palace. So I was there when they took the palace and drove off the Iraqi army and got in there. So I saw that part of it, but I didn't see what was happening up and down the main highway, where we actually almost got overrun. And we would have been trapped, we, meaning the military, would have been trapped in downtown Baghdad. But I didn't know that at the time that was going on. But after I started talking to people, I realized things were it wasn't nearly as easy as it was portrayed, and that there were several close moments, and they were almost overrun, which would have led to an entirely different outcome.
What was your hope in writing the book?
Just to try to explain to people how confusing and disorienting combat is, what it's like on the ground for ordinary soldiers to fight, what it looks like to them and how it feels to them, and try to describe, what combat sounds like and smells like, the fear and the confusion, the casualties, the ugliness. I wanted to show everything. Civilian casualties, people dying because of mistakes, friendly fire. There was an incident of that I wanted to delve into, with U.S. soldiers accidentally killing their fellow soldiers. And I just wanted to get the whole experience of combat, and at the same time, I wanted to tell this story that wasn't told of just how close the U.S. came to getting overrun, to have the whole invasion just stop and have to fight your way out. People didn't realize how difficult it was and how dangerous it was. I think people had the impression that we just kind of rolled into Baghdad and there was really no resistance, and there was a lot of resistance. I just wanted to make sure that got out.
To what extent do you believe a reporter should tell of the brutality of the war?
I think there should be more of it, because I think people in the U.S., in the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, they have the sense that it's very clinical. They hear about casualties, they hear about civilians getting killed, but they never see it or read details about it. And when I go, I try to get as close as possible to the reality of it, just to let people know that war isn't clinical, that it's just awful and confusing and disoriented, terrible, so that maybe the next time, a U.S. president decides we're going to send our soldiers into harm's way, citizens will have a better understanding of just what that means and might be more reluctant to go along with it. I mean, I wish people before we went into Iraq had realized the cost in lives, well, and in money too, but the cost in lives and what it would do to our soldiers, to our military, and to our country to go in and fight a war in a foreign country and try to topple a government. It's not as easy and as straightforward as policymakers might make it seem.